Urania represents Konstantin Daragan. Basics of natal analysis. Regarding the plan of the workshop. Regarding the plan of the seminar. Regarding the complexity of the system. The general plan of the seminar has been drawn up. So we start with the topic of entry into natal astrology. How does it radically differ from other topics? Then, how exactly is natal symbolism interpreted in the framework of natal astrology? This topic cannot be fully understood without knowledge of psychology. This area is largely psychological. The most difficult question is that not everything can be described in figures. The most painful question is who is better than Peter or Vladimir? What is better? We will measure how. There are many questions that go beyond classical science. Nevertheless, these issues need to be addressed. We will study astrology from the very beginning, and about the planets and the signs and the methods of interpretation. We will speak at a fast pace. We will also analyze popular errors. And at intervals there will be oral practice. I will ask you questions so that you do not sleep. You will generate a response. And then we will move on to the next block of information. In addition, there will be an analysis of natal charts. I will show how it works that I showed on the example of these natal charts. In part, this will be simplified. I will analyze these natal charts and give them to you. There is an idea to pass more natal charts than is currently presented. Who will be represented in these natal charts? These will be famous people. In astrology, there is a very important point that is not written in books. Horoscopes of famous people are much easier to analyze than horoscopes of ordinary people. But the reason is not that their biography is widely known. Everything is much simpler. They reveal the potential of their horoscopes. The problem of ordinary people is that they do not allow their horoscope to be fully realized. Yes, you include their horoscopes, including instructions on why they could not be realized. So this is a very difficult question. One of the points that we will discuss with you is why this happens. This is a moment that we will discuss when analyzing natal astrology. It radically distinguishes it from other sections of astrology, even from the medical section. The most important question is, where is the restriction of freedom of will? Roughly speaking, there are things that we cannot change, but there are things that we really can fix. If in the energy plan we are talking about entry, then it actually took place. So the question is for you. If there are no questions, then we will move on to our training course. So first, what am I supposed in astrology as a fundamental method? Analysis of the natal horoscope consists of two processes, each of which is very important. Each of them cannot be undone, one cannot replace the other. This is an analysis of every detail of the natal chart, and the second is a synthesis. Both types of work require a different type of thinking. Some people are better at coping with the first part, while others are better at coping with the second part. Unfortunately, it is necessary to cope with both tasks. What you get worse will have to improve over time through experience. You need to gain experience. You will need to analyze more horoscopes. The first stage is the analysis. We take the whole and cut this whole into pieces. This is what any astrology textbook teaches. This is where natal astrology begins. We take a horoscope. A horoscope is actually a diagram. And we read this scheme according to certain rules. We do not read the horoscope in its entirety. We single out those parts of the horoscope for which astrological rules exist, for which experience already exists, for which statistics exist. Roughly speaking, we dismember the whole and analyze. It is from here that the whole structure of astrological knowledge arises, about which I will speak today. Separation into signifiers, at home, into aspects, and into all other things. Well, when we delve into the fragmentation of the natal chart, there is a risk that we will lose the full picture. The second part of the analysis is that we must collect all the fragments and make a translation into human language. For example, translate into Russian. The point is that we must provide information in an understandable form. This synthesis is a difficult task that we will talk about. This problem is solved by different hemispheres of the brain. This refers to the right and left hemispheres of the brain. Logical and intuitive side. Some people who come to astrology have intuitive thinking. They immediately grab all the necessary elements, they immediately make conclusions without analysis. Sometimes they are successful in this. Some people have rational logical thinking. They can very well describe the power of the planets in numbers. However, they have difficulty in synthesis. You immediately need to learn how to do two things. I do not believe that every person can equally well be able to do these two things at once. I even know astrologers who like to work in pairs because of this. Someone gets a better logical analysis, someone gets a better synthesis. So one person does the first, the second performs a logical task, and together they come to a certain conclusion. But basically we work independently. Initially, this workshop included 2 different workshops. So the first part of the seminar will be devoted to the analysis of the natal chart. This is the depth of understanding of the elements, categories. What is elevation, what is reception, what are aspects, and so on. And the second part is connected with the synthesis based on a large number of natal horoscopes. This seminar is planned in such a way that its first part, the first day of the seminar, will be devoted mainly to analysis. This is the theoretical part. The second part of the seminar will be devoted to the synthesis of these elements, the applied application of this information. The theme of the absence of children, indicators of widowhood, success, career guidance, and similar things. Another difficulty that exists, at what stage in the development of astrology you are now. For example, I am now in an unusual situation. See how many people are currently in the audience. Look, astrology is not like an entertainment show. In fact, this is a quiet work in the office. Many of those who came here have good practice in astrology, they are quite successful. However, I will talk about fairly primitive things. What you will take from my information depends on what stage of development you are individually. Pavel Globa, the most authoritative Russian astrologer, had a very good metaphor. Anything that we master can be superimposed on the zodiac signs. For example, the first impulse that arises, you felt an interest in astrology, I want. There is no Venus, there is no patience, there is simply a strong desire. By then comes the period of Taurus. We write a compendium, we record on a voice recorder of books, understanding is minimal so far. Then we go to the twin zodiac sign stage. At this point, understanding begins. This is the moon, this is the trigon. That is, we already understand, we have learned the language system. After that, you understand that after all you have little knowledge. The stage of deeper study begins. This is the stage of the zodiac sign Cancer. You are interested in the history of this science. For example, why Mars is responsible for the war. By the way, in astrology this is not the easiest moment, as people came to the conclusion that Mars is responsible for the war. That is, this is the stage of deepening in practice. Basically, those who come to my seminars do not come earlier than the stage of the zodiac sign Leo. At this stage, people begin to play astrology, they have the first results. Some people have good results, and some do not have very good results. A guessing element is also present. That is, a person does not yet have systemic knowledge. In one place they are successful, in another place they fail. Sometimes it turns out very accurately, you know how newcomers are lucky in the casino. And very often, at the Leo stage, a rollback begins. Because Leo is a fixed sign, he often rolls back, acquires dogmas, acquires esoteric ideas. Dogma is Saturn, he is a true position in Leo. All kinds of esotericism only bring harm. The movement begins in the opposite direction. But we must take a step towards the zodiac sign Virgo, take a step towards systemic astrology, our own systemic knowledge. And only after the rational Virgo do we go to the stage of the zodiac sign of Libra. This sign is in opposition to Aries, from which we began to study astrology. It turns out that only at this moment a person can fully analyze his own horoscope. Because he does not look at this horoscope as his own, because it is the seventh house. Then other problems begin, but we want to talk about them. The zodiac sign Scorpio begins there, disappointment in astrology. Then you need to reach the zodiac sign Sagittarius. This is the natural course of things. Relatively speaking, I orient my seminar on the zodiac sign Virgo. I am talking about those students who need to collect all available symbolism into the system and fill in the necessary gaps. I assume that you already have a certain knowledge base, but suddenly there will be something else that you do not know. In fact, this seminar is designed for this. So, what is the difference between natal analysis and other areas of astrology? There is a major radical difference. Why the reading of the natal chart occurs according to different rules in contrast to other areas of astrology. This key difference is that man is a living being. Man has a soul and he develops. Man is not like a horary diagram. Any other horoscopes have no soul and have no potential for development. The horoscope of human birth does not change throughout life. The horoscope of birth is a diagram. But man changes continuously. For example, there is a bald baby with an optimal weight of 3.5 kg. And there is an old man with the same horoscopes and also bald, but only for other reasons. But the old man has life experience. We change continuously, our experience leads us to change. So a horoscope is a skeleton-like foundation. This skeleton is filled with what we get throughout life. In other words, there is a basis, there is a phenotype like a human being, and then there is an element of our own participation in our own life. Sometimes we live by the principle, from bad to run, good to take. We avoid the negatives that are in our horoscopes in the direction of what we do best. But we must consciously approach this process in order to go beyond the limitations of the horoscope. That is, in natal astrology, the horoscope is a development. My ego is not a static horoscope. Therefore, part of the rules here is considered in a completely different vein. I will focus on features. The development of the natal horoscope fundamentally changes some things related to the interpretation. Precisely because man is a developing system that has freedom of choice. We may not always act as planned in the horoscope. In other words, events happen in our lives. How we respond to events depends, to a large extent, on the life experience that you and I have received. From how we are going to respond to these events. These are unpredictable things to a greater or lesser extent. We can say that a person with a certain temperament will react in a certain way. But in fact, this is a conditional question. Because you can change many skills quite strongly, you can go far enough from the horoscope of birth. One of the problems of natal astrology, one of the typical problems is that it is impossible to completely transfer techniques from one section of astrology to another section of astrology. For example, the subject of peregrines has recently been very popular. In horary astrology, in this I agree with William Lilly, such a planet in the 7th house in matters of theft means a thief. In other words, this planet has no essential virtues. This planet is repeated to pick up an alien in order to survive. In natal astrology the picture is different. A person is born with the same potential. How he will develop it is another matter. This also applies to issues such as exile and fall. Well then, let's take a vivid example. I was curious what instructions there are for the ruler of sports and war, the planet Mars. I looked at people who became world boxing champions. I took the most consistent version that this sport really corresponds to Mars. For example, Klitschko is recognized as the best boxer of the 20th century. He has a retrograde Mars in Aquarius. One of the best boxers of the 20th century, Muhammad Ali, he has a bad Mars in Taurus. Who else would remember a kind word? For example, Mike Tyson. Aggressive and evil, he even as a person is evil in itself. He has Mars in the zodiac sign Gemini, which has no aspects. If house managers are located in a certain way, then a person will realize this potential. A person has some fact of the horoscope, and then he gains experience throughout his life. If you are not professional, it is written in books that a strong planet in a horoscope means talent, and a weak planet in a horoscope means lack of talent. At first glance, this is the base. This rule is. But a person in the course of his fate does not stand still. Suppose if we start some kind of training, we can do this action for the first time 10 times, and in a month we will get it 100 times. After all, no one will be surprised. We all believe that this can be developed, there is no problem. Why do we think that it is impossible to develop Mercury, reading? We can develop other abilities and some other things. That is, these are normal and natural situations. But in astrology it turns out that not for everyone. This idea is even theoretically acceptable. However, without this information, natal analysis is completely impossible, because we will perceive a person as a static object. We perceive it as a mechanism, as an object that responds to external factors always the same, regardless of age, even though he is young, middle-aged or old. Another feature that is associated with natal analysis. It is because the horoscope is associated with the development of man. It is precisely because a person does not remain completely static. He greatly changes his behavior under the influence of forecasts. He is very much affected by age. Therefore, even astrologers of the past clearly understood that the natal chart cannot be as fatal as, for example, a horror. Especially if the horror is truly thought out and truly radical. In Bonatti, who is one of the most respected astrologers of the past, he said one very interesting saying. It sounds something like this: natal charts, unlike horary ones, do not always correctly predict the future. Horary cards are like an appeal after a sentence. This phrase helps to find out the difference between these two forecasting methods. In other words, the natal horoscope always develops and there is an element of uncertainty. A person has freedom of choice, and even those who do not believe in or suspect about it have freedom of choice. I have a fresh example. My client wrote to me. She asks, I changed my profession, is this my destination? To what I asked her, did you change your profession because you were threatened with a pistol, me or something else? She answers, it was my voluntary choice. That is, we must understand where this line is. Your life is a new opportunity, this is fate, I could predict this event. You have made a decision. Yes, an astrologer based on the natal chart can determine that you are more prone to this kind of decision. But in fact, you could have made a different decision. This element of free will changes a lot. I believe that the metaphor that Jung cited is very true. It is within the framework of this idea that I will tell you about the use of planets. When Jung came up with the idea of archetypes, he was hooked by the thought of how the crystal is formed. Well, let's say how the salt crystal grows. How does the salt crystal know that it should be rectangular? The salt crystal has no axes, this is not observed in the crystal itself. Well, somewhere in chemistry or in physics, or in salt molecules, this idea is contained that the salt crystal should be built along the axis. The crystal begins to build itself, it doesn't come out perfectly on it. External influences can somehow distort it. Nevertheless, the crystal is trying to form. According to the program laid down in it, this is the archetype. By analogy with the archetype, he called the internal psychological forces, these are the forces that are inherent in us from birth. Within this archetype, we accumulate experience throughout life. There are many strategies to gain experience. For example, if the moon is very significant in your natal chart, let's say the moon is located in some unfavorable signs like Aries or Scorpio, where it is very sensitive to violence. And then for such a person, encountering violence against him or violence against other people can be a very significant experience. The archetype of your moon will be superimposed with the corresponding life experience. I have a friend, he is an adult solid man, however, he doesn't eat chicken, because in childhood I saw how his grandmother killed a chicken. He has a bad moon in Capricorn. This event had an impact on him. For example, for me such a problem does not exist, including killing any animal to eat it, because for me it is not a traumatic experience. In other words, life experience is superimposed on the archetypes that exist in our horoscope. Because of this, we carry out natal analysis. We do not immediately receive all the planets and all the actions that are in the horoscope. Another feature that is associated with natal analysis. It is because the horoscope is associated with the development of man. It is precisely because a person does not remain completely static. He greatly changes his behavior under the influence of forecasts. He is very much affected by age. Therefore, even astrologers of the past clearly understood that the natal chart cannot be as fatal as, for example, a horror. Especially if the horror is truly thought out and truly radical. In Bonatti, who is one of the most respected astrologers of the past, he said one very interesting saying. It sounds something like this: natal charts, unlike horary ones, do not always correctly predict the future. Horary cards are like an appeal after a sentence. This phrase helps to find out the difference between these two forecasting methods. In other words, the natal horoscope always develops and there is an element of uncertainty. The person has freedom of choice, and even those who do not believe in or suspect about it have freedom of choice. I have a fresh example. My client wrote to me. She asks, I changed my profession, is this my destination? To what I asked her, did you change your profession because you were threatened with a pistol, me or something else? She answers, it was my voluntary choice. That is, we must understand where this line is. Your life is a new opportunity, this is fate, I could predict this event. You have made a decision. Yes, an astrologer based on the natal chart can determine that you are more prone to this kind of decision. But in fact, you could have made a different decision. This element of free will changes a lot. I believe that the metaphor that Jung cited is very true. It is within the framework of this idea that I will tell you about the use of planets. When Jung came up with the idea of archetypes, he was hooked by the thought of how the crystal is formed. Well, let's say how the salt crystal grows. How does the salt crystal know that it should be rectangular? The salt crystal has no axes, this is not observed in the crystal itself. Well, somewhere in chemistry or in physics, or in salt molecules, this idea is contained that the salt crystal should be built along the axis. The crystal begins to build itself, it doesn't come out perfectly on it. External influences can somehow distort it. Nevertheless, the crystal is trying to form. According to the program laid down in it, this is the archetype. By analogy with the archetype, he called the internal psychological forces, these are the forces that are inherent in us from birth. Within this archetype, we accumulate experience throughout life. There are many strategies to gain experience. For example, if the moon is very significant in your natal chart, let's say the moon is located in some unfavorable signs like Aries or Scorpio, where it is very sensitive to violence. And then for such a person, encountering violence against him or violence against other people can be a very significant experience. The archetype of your moon will be superimposed with the corresponding life experience. I have a friend, he is an adult solid man, however, he doesn't eat chicken, because in childhood I saw how his grandmother killed a chicken. He has a bad moon in Capricorn, this event had an impact on him. For example, for me such a problem does not exist, including killing any animal to eat it, because for me it is not a traumatic experience. In other words, life experience is superimposed on the archetypes that exist in our horoscope. Because of this, we carry out natal analysis. We do not immediately receive all the planets and all the actions that are in the horoscope. I did not specifically deal with this issue. But astrologers from previous centuries believed that in the horoscopes of conception the meaning of signs changes, even to the extent that other planets control these signs. However, I did not check this data. I analyzed only a few horoscopes of conception just because of curiosity. But the meaning is this: the horoscope of conception is similar to the plan, and the horoscope of birth is similar to the implementation of the plan. The horoscope of conception may be cancelled, the child may not be born. The horoscope of birth cannot be undone. If God forbid the child died at a young age, then all the same he had already lived for some time. This is an early death. This is a different situation. Therefore, the difference between them is very significant. What is more interesting is the horoscope of conception, in that it lays down certain pros and cons of horoscopes of birth. I will explain this situation using metaphor. In general, during a lecture I will very often use metaphors. This is similar to the graph. When we have 2 points on the graph, we can draw a straight line between them. We can understand the direction of this line. Optimal work starts from the moment when you understand the events from the biography. I will give an example of how these important points are used from a situation when I advise clients. For example, we see in the natal chart that in a certain year a person could have a career advancement, it could be rewards, there could be certain achievements. We ask the man what he had in a certain year. The person answers your question and you understand the scale of the process. Reference points appear. For example, you ask, what did you have in a marriage this year? Because in my opinion it was a problem year. The man answers you that this year he divorced. And accordingly, I understand for myself that on such an aspect, which has already been, I can make other forecasts. That is, the theoretical conception horoscope is very important since we can get additional information from it. But unfortunately the Western classical school of astrology knows little about this issue. The Eastern school of astrology has studied this question much better, but I have no contact with them. However, there is another problem. Astrologers of the past did not know that the conception of a child does not occur at the time of ecstasy. An absolutely wonderful evidence has been preserved that astrologers of the past sat under the king's door and waited for him to ring the bell. The astrologer made a note in his journal, and after that he built a horoscope. However, now we know that fertilization occurs both 24 and 48 hours after the event. Therefore, with a horoscope, conception is not all simple. Also, the horoscope of conception has another problem. This again is connected with the primitive thinking of astrologers of the past. Due to the fact that they believed that fertilization occurs at the time of ecstasy, they used a rectification method called Hermes Triton. Tritina Hermes says that if you were conceived at certain hours, then you can only be born at certain hours. But in fact this is not so. There is a theory that Hermes Triton works well if the pregnancy proceeded without any pathologies. But now to find a pregnancy without pathology is difficult enough. Secondly, most obstetricians of our time resort to cesarean section to circumvent the problems that may be associated with birth. It is easier for a woman to have a cesarean section than having a baby on her own. Purely technically, it is easier to get a baby out of the mother's body than give birth to it. There is an erroneous opinion that when they do a cesarean section, it is like a deception of fate, and you need to build a horoscope on the date when a person was supposed to be born. However, I do not agree with this opinion. I believe that the moment of birth is the moment of the first breath. Therefore, we are building a horoscope at the time of the first breath, even if a cesarean section was planned. Another question is that cesarean section as well as other measures during childbirth are often reflected in the natal chart. Very often, these planets controlling the first house indicate what kind of birth. Sometimes these are aspects to the ascendant. I had a situation, according to the ruler of the 12th house. This is a girl, a client. Her father hit her mother very hard, after which a premature birth began. If I am not mistaken, she had Mars in opposition to Saturn. It seems to be Cancer and Capricorn, and Lilith was there too. That is, he hit her when the ascendant passed precisely this position. That is, the potential was realized, childbirth was provoked. The next moment, relocation. I can say that I have a lot of experience. I can say that I have a large research base. But according to the experience that I have, I can say that the natal chart is the main one where it has not moved. It doesn't matter how long a person moved to another city. There are some things that I should comment on. If the horoscope of relocation changed fate, then fate could be adjusted within a very wide range. We see things like death by the cusp of the 8th house. We also look through the rulers of the 8th house, and through the rulers of the 1st house. If relocation completely abolished natal houses, we could do amazing things. If we see death in the horoscope of the directorate, we could just pack our bags and move to another place. We could live in another city for several years until the directorate ends, then I could return to our city and live there further. I do not believe that this is possible. I think so not because I'm a pessimist, I think so because it goes beyond reality. The natal chart cannot be undone, it will still indicate certain things. Although using relocation you can undo some problems. For example, my clients listened to my forecast, assessed the economic situation in our country, packed their things, and went to live in Bali, India. They said that they'd better watch everything that happens on TV on what is happening in the country. Then they wrote to me via the internet. It turns out there is paradise on earth. This paradise is in Bali, come to us. Here in Bali, low prices and a good climate. A very important question, at what point does relocation begin to work? Here we have a very controversial issue, because relocation, this topic is modern astrology. This is a technique of the 20th century. In any case, I do not see examples in the literature of the past. For someone to change the natal horoscope when moving to another city, there is a point of view that the horoscope of relocation begins to work immediately. But according to my experience, a person does not immediately adapt to a new city. The question is, how long does it take for your appearance to change when you move? With relocation, the position of the ascendant changes, and accordingly, the appearance must also change. How long does it take? Naturally, some things can change immediately, such as clothes or hairstyle. But it takes time to change your weight. Based on my experience, I must say that the natal chart is still the main base in the vast majority of cases. We can use the horoscope of relocation for forecasting. There are exceptions for the natal chart when we change it to a relocation horoscope if a person has moved to the new city for a very long time and has been living there for several decades. We also look at the horoscope of relocation as the main one if a person moved to a new place in a very early childhood, when he was just forming as a person. If a person moved to a new city at a very young age, then the natal chart works very cruelly. In these cases, the relocation chart works better. I have many cases when a person moves to a new place at an early age, when he is a baby and still does not understand anything, and when he has no choice. This person is growing up in this new place, respectively, horoscope houses are being formed in a new place. As a result, we have a case when the horoscope of relocation is stronger than the horoscope of birth. The next paragraph. Earth systems. I did not conduct large-scale experiments, so what I say is my personal experience. I use the Placidus house system because it gives a good result. But when the Placidus house system does not give a satisfactory result, then I switch to the Koch house system. I do not use the third additional system of houses. However, other astrologers have a different opinion. For example, Pavel Globa says that 12 systems of houses can be used simultaneously. This gives different levels of understanding of one fate. However, I have never tested it myself. Placidus is the most universal system. Most astrologers agree that this system best describes events. However, I know cases when I cannot determine events in this system, when this system does not give a positive result. Until you switch to Koch, you get no results. How you will do it, unfortunately you have to decide individually. I also want to mention the systems that were used before our time. In Old Springs, a system of equal houses is very often used. For example, in old books very often the sign is equal to home. Regardless of the degree where the ascendant is located, it is believed that this sign is the entire first house. For example, all Taurus is the second house, all Scorpio is the eighth house. In this way, I tried to read horoscopes of people I knew. I did not get the impression that this works. Maybe I missed some points, maybe I don't know all the details of ancient techniques. That is, a certain system of houses involves interpretations of a certain kind. Why do I specially focus your attention on the problem of houses? Because there is a very complicated topic of the position of planets in houses and non-cusps. So in the Placidus and Co., the house cusps are a bit floating. In the future I will mention what terminal planets are. Terminal planets must be interpreted in a special way. But I do not think that the planet 5 degrees before the cusp of the house belongs to the next house. Because from my practice this does not work in any way. The next moment. In natal analysis, we use 4 basic elements. It is important to understand the principle correctly and correctly prioritize. One of the 4 basic elements in astrology is planets and objects such as fictitious points and stars. The second is the signs of the zodiac, the chessboard fields along which the planets go. The third element is at home, these are the fields in which everything happens. The fourth element is aspects and other ways of planetary interaction. These 4 elements enter into certain relationships. I have been trying for a long time to find a suitable definition and analogy. The most banal analogy, this analogy is not mine, but it is very successful. This analogy is connected with the fact that these 4 elements perform completely different functions in astrology. Planets are roughly actors, they have their own character and they have their own appearance. They have their own typical roles. Planets cannot change their roles. For example, just as we can change our height, for example, we can still change our weight, but we can change our height. Therefore, planets, roughly speaking, are actors. The role that the planet is forced to play is the position of the planet in the zodiac sign. This is how the actor fits into the role play that he is offered. For example, the actor is Mars. Mars must be assertive and aggressive. For example, he is given the role of a diplomat, Mars in the zodiac sign of Libra. He may have something and succeed, but I have an inadequate role for him. But Mars cannot manifest itself in scales as harmoniously. How will it manifest itself in the zodiac signs Aries, Capricorn, or Scorpio? This also applies to the planet Peregrine. The planet gets a role, and she is forced to do it. The planet was forced to put on this costume.
What is Peregrine?
It means that the planet in the natal chart does not have any advantages. Classical astrology is considered that the planet Peregrine does not have any major advantages, that is, the abode or exaltation. And also such a planet does not have a single minor advantage, triplicity and term. There are still many questions about triplicity that I will explain. Therefore, for me, overgrowth is a very controversial concept. However, it is certain that in horary astrology it is necessary to take into account the hummocks. However, in natal astrology, overgrowth is greatly overrated. And I suspect that this is due to the fact that some people have a desire to consider their natal chart better than other people. Roles of the astrological zodiac sign are roles that more or less correspond to the planets. For example, why Jupiter in the zodiac sign Capricorn is a planet in the fall. Because the role of Jupiter is the role of a moralist, the role of a priest, the role of a good person. The Capricorn zodiac sign initially involves the removal of all unnecessary in order to achieve the goal. Morality for Capricorn is an excess. Therefore, Jupiter in Capricorn is tempted to be a pragmatist. He does not respect morality in order to achieve the goal. Jupiter in Capricorn resorts to manipulation. Aspects. This is the type of interaction between these actors who wear different costumes. We see which of them is cursing with whom. Let's say Mars is in opposition to Venus. Let's say we have a lover on the stage, Mars, the beautiful Venus is in opposition to him. According to the scenario in this natal chart, they will have intense dialogues. They will not find each other. In other words, aspect is a way of interacting planets. And finally at home, this is the scenery in which everything happens. And for example, the scenery can be different. Even if you are posing, well, let's say it will be Venus. May Venus be strong, may this Venus be on the scales. Let it be a socialite, let it be well dressed, let's say it will be a business suit, because Libra is a sign where Saturn exalts, and Saturn is responsible for moderation. And now such Venus is in the 12th house. The 12th house is a little prison, the 12th house is a little dump, this is a little hospital. That is, we get that the appearance is correct, its qualities are correct, and the house is bad. Venus cannot fully realize herself in such a house. This is if we are talking about the theater analogy. Suppose if you have a technical or mathematical background. In this case, we can apply another analogy. In this case, planets are objects and their properties. Also sometimes planets act as functions. Zodiac signs modify these functions. Aspects are the interaction between different kinds of planets. At home, this is how we apply these objects. Roughly speaking, we can hammer screws with a hammer. But this is not the right strategy to use these planets. If you have a basic humanitarian education, you can draw the following analogy. When we begin to learn to read astrological instructions, then this is a good methodical technique. It is not necessary to limit this technique, it is not necessary to consider that this is a strict rule, it is simply an effective technique. A planet is a noun or verb. The zodiac sign is always an adjective. At home, circumstances, position and action. And aspects are the connecting elements of the language. Suppose the verb is a planet, well, let's say that this is the planet Mars. Let's say that one of the things that is connected with Mars is courage. And let's say that Mars is in the zodiac sign Cancer. This means courage like the zodiac sign Cancer. That is, such a person is very brave when surrounded by weak people. Although I draw your attention that the evolution of man and the study of the planets decides a lot. In order not to go far, the second brother is Klitschko, he has Mars in Cancer. What am I trying to explain to you? First, Mars in the zodiac sign Cancer, this noun is what we are trying to describe. The second point, the zodiac sign is an adjective. This is an adjective that describes how this noun will manifest itself or how this verb will act. What is Mars? Seek, capture, be aggressive. What is the sun? It is to create light, to give light to the outside world. The sun is always in the center of something. Houses will point to the sphere of manifestation, to all kinds of circumstances, to the place. And aspects will point to connecting elements. However, there are some hidden obstacles that we will talk about after a 5-minute break. Therefore, when relocating, if you are building a horoscope, the time of birth should not change. Should not be categorically. The time of birth was only once and for all, when you made your whole globe happy with your appearance. It should correspond to the Greenwich meridian. When moving, only geography changes, only longitude and latitude change. In this way, the system of houses changes. The farther away, the more powerful the change. If you move to the United States of America, then the turn of the natal chart is almost 180 degrees. Therefore, this method is used for correction. The second question was correct, which is still considered a birth. Astrology came to birth in 4 ways. As far as I know, it is described by Mikhail Levin. Birth can be fiery, if I remember correctly, when the baby as little prime appeared. It may be a water birth when the water is just away and the irreversible process of childbirth has begun. This may be due to the earth element when the child just appeared from the mother's body. Also, earthly birth is when the umbilical cord is cut off. And air birth is when the first cry of a child appears. However, I am most inclined to the idea that birth occurs when the first breath occurs. I share the idea of when the irreversible process begins. The waters have departed, but this is not quite a birth. Birth begins from the moment when the child is a completely independent being. From this moment, a person was born, and even if he wants, he will not be able to get back. This process begins with the fact that we begin to breathe, and we breathe throughout life. For example, in the philosophy of yoga, it is believed that each person has released a certain number of breaths. We can change this in any way. This is a philosophy. For obvious reasons, I did not check this in any way. But the point of this philosophy is that if you want to live longer, then breathe more slowly.